Agitorium nostrum in nomine Domini. In history now we finished St. Justin, the martyr, the great philosopher. Now we have a little short chapter on a new life, Archbishop Cyprian. Saint Cyprian. Saint Cyprian. Life began for Thesius Cyprian in his late 40s or early 50s. A sleek, overfed, rather jovial, pompous professor of rhetoric, the son of a chief senator of Carthage. He'd always enjoyed everything that money could buy: rich houses, gorgeous clothing, choice foods and wines, books and pictures, women galore. He had no end of pensioners to clatter at his heels when he sauntered up the hill toward the citadel and the temple of Aesculapius. Or if he stood in pensive mood gazing out across the two great harbors, one with its top-heavy triremes of war, the other with its merchantmen loaded with grain, olives, wine, and cork for distant places. What's cork? Do you know it actually comes from a tree? The cork on wine bottles? It actually comes from a tree. It's actual grows cork. That's what the tree is. It's all cork. So they cut out the cork for the wine bottles. Mm-hmm. That's quite impressive, isn't it?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So wine and cork for distant places. There was always some so-called friend who would stop by to flatter and console him. Enviable to many was the lot of one who could sate the hunger of his mind with ideas. I repeat. Enviable to many was the lot of one who could sate the hunger of his mind, that means saturate, with ideas as fleeting and as various as the shapes of Proteus, and slake the passions of his body, for the time being at least, with all the vices for which that hoary city was infamous even after it had risen from the Roman ashes. Why then was he so tired, jaded, and bored on the threshold of old age? What was the meaning of all this futility? For a sense of futility was almost all that remained of him after mocking youth had finished with him. And then, by the grace of God, about the year 247 AD, he met Caecilius. Caecilius, or in Latin it'd be Caecilius. Caecilius. So St. Cyprian, it looks like he was, just a well-fed doughboy who was reveling in the pleasures of the world. He had everything at his feet. Caecilius was an old Catholic priest. Father Caecilius then. He was learned as well as holy. He was able, in many discussions, to shed new light on philosophical questions that St. Cyprian had been mulling over for years in his graver moments. Likely enough, he gave him the works of Tertullian to read. Tertullian. Who's he? Anyone?
He was a theologian, wasn't he, during the time that...
Yes, he is considered one of the church fathers, and he's often quoted by St. Thomas Aquinas and many saints. But he wasn't canonized, I think because towards the end of his life he fell into some error.
Manichaeans.
Was it the Manichaean error? Yeah. So him, like Origen, they were often quoted, and good men, but it shows even the best can fall. and the best can fall. You know, none of us expected Bishop Fillet to compromise. None of us expected Bishop Williamson to start promoting the new Mass and new Mass miracles in his last 10 years. You know, so we have to fear and tremble lest we also collapse and fall. We need to be humble and beg the grace of God, especially the Immaculate Heart of Mary. So he began reading Tertullian. More important still, he prayed for him earnestly, this priest, and made him acquainted with members of the Christian community at Carthage. So the early Catholics at Carthage. So this is, where's Carthage, anybody?
It is
Africa.
Yeah, in Africa.
Northern Africa.
Yes. So here's Northern Africa. Here's the Nile River. Carthage is somewhere up here. Maybe even closer to the shore. Carthage. And of course across the, what sea?
Atlantic.
No, that's
Mediterranean.
The Mediterranean Sea. So across from the sea is Rome. This must have been very numerous, if somewhat lacking in fervor. Even in the 2nd century, a generation after the death of St. Justin, Carthage had numbered so many that Tertullian could boast in the year 197 AD, quote, Tertullian, though but of yesterday we have filled every place, cities, islands, fortresses, towns, marketplaces, the camp itself, tribes, companies, palaces, the senate, the forum. We have left you nothing but the temples of your gods. What's he talking about?
All the positions that the Christians have
Right.
are in.
This,
Assumed.
yeah, the spread of the Catholics in every domain of life. Except where?
The false temples.
Right. 16 years later, he had boldly defied the proconsul Scapula with these words, quote, what will you make of so many thousands, of such a multitude of men and women, persons of every age, sex, and rank? When they present themselves before you, how many fires, how many swords will be needed? Tertullian knew that he was talking about what he was talking about in this regard. Born about the time when St. Justin died, Tertullian was a grown man in Carthage, when the heroic martyrs of the year 203 laid down their lives as witnesses for Christ. And surely Father Cecilius must have handed on to Cyprian his unforgettable account of that lovely young society matron, Vivia Perpetua, who had put away the infant from her breast and turned from the pleadings of her aged father to face the wild beasts, waiting to tear her to pieces, when a single cowardly word would have saved her. That was St. Perpetua and St. Felicity, right? She was still nursing a baby in prison. And she went to death, trusting that God would take care of her baby. How many mothers would do that today? How many mothers would do that today? Give their baby to some other relative so they would be killed for the faith. A beautiful and terrible story. What was it that gave such courage to these Christians? And what did old Father Cecilius mean when he told St. Cyprian that if he would accept the kingship of Christ and be baptized, he would be born again and be a new man? How could that be? Asked Cyprian, like Nicodemus in the Gospel. How is such a conversion possible that a man should suddenly and quickly give up that which, either born in us and hardened through the inertia of our material nature, or acquired by us, has become an inveterate custom as old age came upon us? These things have become deeply enrooted and ingrained in us. When does he learn thrift who has grown used to dinners and suppers and big banquets? And he who is conspicuous for his expensive clothes and has been sparkling in gold and purple, when does he reduce himself to plebeian and simple attire? A man often delighted by farces and public honors cannot adapt himself to private in an inglorious life. One attended by swarms of clients and dignified by the numerous attention of officious attendants and servants thinks it a punishment to be alone. It needs must be, and it has always been so, that the love of wine entice, pride enlarge, anger inflame, greed make uneasy, cruelty stimulate, ambition delight, lust carry on headlong to ruin, with never loosening allurements. So this is a quote from St. Cyprian himself right here. I go on. These things often went through my mind, for as I myself was held fast in the errors of my former life, from which I did not believe it possible to extricate myself, so I was inclined to go along with my clinging vices and despairing of anything better. I used to indulge in my evil doings as if they were already part and parcel of me. So he was quite established in some sinful habits, he admits. That was a letter, Epistle 1 to Donatus, in the Mean Patrology, M-I-G-N-E. While the old rake flung himself into a last almost desperate debauch, the priest, Father Cecilius, patiently continued to say prayers and to do penance for Cyprian. And the upshot was that one day in the year 246 A.D., he had the pleasure of baptizing his friend, who in his honor took the name Ctesius Cecilius Cyprian. So his baptismal name was Ctesius Cecilius Cyprian. Putting on the new man at his baptism may not have been as sudden a process, however, as the convert had imagined. After his baptism, he said, quote, "A light from above, serene and pure, seemed to have found its way into his heart, making things easy that had seemed impossible before, and little by little hidden things were revealed to him. Nevertheless, he had the usual struggle with habit to face and overcome." So old habits of drinking maybe, old habits of lust, old habits of overindulgence, etc., drunkenness maybe too. Apparently it was not until after the death of Father Cecilius that St. Cyprian was able to rise above the average decent Christian life and seek the perfection to which Christ had invited his disciples. Possibly the responsibility of looking after the wife and children of another on his deathbed committed to his care aroused him to the need of showing them a better example. At all events, he resolved now that since he was a Christian, he would be a good one, putting away all compromise with the world, the flesh, and the devil. He sold his fine houses. Notice the plural. He sold his fine houses and gave most of the proceeds to guess who?
Poor.
To the poor. He devoted days and night to the study of the Old and New Testaments and to the works of their great defender and interpreter, Tertullian, whom, despite the lapse of that rigorist in his later years, he called my master. So, he fell into the rigorism, I guess, of Manichaeism.
Yes.
So Tertullian, he called him his master. He wore clothes neither mean nor ostentatious, but in keeping with his new principles, and according to his contemporary biographer Pontius, he became noted for a grave and joyous face. Gradually, as he strove for utter purity of thought and speech as well as action, his old tastes and associations became disgusting to him. He could no longer endure the lewdness of the degenerate stage or the bloody sadism of the gladiatorial games. He spent long hours in prayer. Finally, he began to have visions in which Christ spoke to him and counseled him. So that tells you, he probably went often to the gladiatorial games. Popcorn, beer, and watch, some Christians get torn up. Or gladiators go at it until one of them was dead. The world St. Cyprian looked on, a world which Christianity had only begun to transform, was uncomfortably like our 20th century one, with its increasing de-Christianization. So this is William Thomas Walsh writing this in the 40s. This is the 40s, and he's calling it degenerate. There already was contraception. That was common in the 40s already. The fashions were going very immodest. The pencil skirts were the new thing, which was a miniskirt. It is a miniskirt. It's at the knees. It goes to the knees, or just above. And then, what else? Tighter clothes on the women. And rock and roll has not yet hit the scene, but jazz is in. In the 40s, jazz is in. And there's a good study by Richard Weaver called Ideas of Consequences, where he shows jazz is degenerate music, and it is the immediate father of rock and roll. Bishop Williamson used to call Beethoven the grandfather of rock and roll music, because you pick up the thunder of the French Revolution. And then jazz could be called the father of rock and roll music. So he's calling the 40s degenerate. And Pope Pius XII said in the 50s that mankind has fallen lower than before the fall of Noah, before the flood of Noah. Mankind has fallen and become much worse. And that was the golden days of the 40s and 50s, which we think are the good old days, but they really weren't. Consider the roadblocks. Where are we here? Consider the roads blocked up by robbers, he wrote to a friend. The seas beset with pirates, war scattered all over the earth with the bloody horror of camps. The whole world is wet with mutual blood and murder, which in the case of an individual is admitted to be a crime, is called a virtue when it is committed wholesale. Impunity is claimed for crimes not on the ground of innocence, but because the atrocity is on such a large scale. Close quote. As for the gladiatorial games in every city, he writes, what can be said to be more inhuman, what more revolting? Men are trained to acquire the power to murder, and the achievement of murder is its glory. Living men, they are adorned for a voluntary death. Wretched men, they boast of their own miseries. They fight with beasts, not for their crime, but for their madness. Fathers look on their own sons. A brother is in the arena, and his sister is hard by, and although a more spectacular show raises the price of admission, yet, oh shame, even a mother will pay the increase to be present at her own miseries. He writes, turn your face hence to the contagions of various spectacles, no less to be condemned. In the theaters, you will see also what may well cause you grief and shame. It is the tragic buskin which retails in verse the crimes of old times. In the mimes, moreover, by the teaching of infamous things, the spectator is led either to think back upon what he may have done in secret, or to hear what he may do. Adultery is learned while it is seen. The matron who perhaps has gone to the show, a modest woman, returns from it impure. Still more, what a degradation of morals it is, what a stimulus to abominable deeds, what food for vice, to be polluted by his histrionic gestures, to see, against the very law and covenant of one's birth, the endurance of incestuous depravity. So he's talking about the theaters of his time. So we're there already, right? The video games where they slice each other up, right? And then, what's that game called where they can do anything to anybody? GTA?
Grand Theft Auto.
Grand Theft Auto?
Been on for a while.
Yeah, it's horrible.
Yeah, and then all the movies, Vice, Impurity, etc. And it's much worse now, of course, pornography. Men are emasculated, and all the pride and vigor of manhood is made effeminate in the disgrace of their enervated bodies. And he is most pleasing there who has most thoroughly broken down the man into the woman. Wow, so he's already seen effeminate men. He's talking about this. And this is 300s. Yeah, Rome would collapse around the 400s, and that's when they started having women in the military and in politics. That was one of the signs of the collapse of Rome. Can he who looks upon such things be healthy-minded or modest? The lustful and degenerate crimes portrayed on the stage of the theater were widely imitated in private lives. He added, public life was universally dishonest. Judges sold their sentences. Theft, forgery, deceit were everywhere, condoned and covered up. He said, the laws have come to terms with crimes. Wow, doesn't this describe our age? And this is decadent Rome, decadent Carthage. The rich strove for more wealth and found only more misery, fearing robbery, murder, lawsuits, revenge. The rich man enjoyed no security either at table or in sleep. He writes, St. Cyprian, in the midst of the banquet he sighs, although he drinks from a jeweled goblet, and when his luxurious bed has enfolded in its yielding bosom his feast-drugged body, he lies awake in the midst of the down, that's the feathers, down feathers, nor does he perceive, poor wretch, that these things are merely gilded torments, that he is held in bondage by his gold, that he is the slave of his luxury and wealth rather than their master. From him there is no generosity to dependents, no sharing with the poor. And yet such people call that their own money, which they guard with such jealous labor. Their possessions amount only to this, that they can keep other people from possessing it. So that's another quote from chapter 6 to 12 from St. Cyprian. Well, St. Cyprian was through with all that now, thank God. He had got rid of his own excessive wealth and its burdens. He was free at last in the freedom of Christ. So changed was he, in fact, that the Catholics of Carthage, following a custom of the early church, began to demand publicly that he be ordained a priest. And when his friend Bishop Donatus died, the ancient streets resounded with the cry, Tatius Bishop, Tatius Cyprian Bishop. St. Cyprian declined the honor. A mob broke into his house to force it upon him. He leapt from a window to escape, but they caught him on the street and hoisted him up on their shoulders, declaring that they would have no other bishop. Despite a small minority who for some reason opposed him, the dishonest clerk Felicissimus, the sly ambitious priest, Father Novetus, and a few others, St. Cyprian was elected by popular acclaim. He was consecrated the following year, in the year 249 AD, on the eve of tragic and glorious events. So 249 AD, he's a bishop. Well, let us pray to him for some good bishops. Surveying his flock from his new eminence, he had every reason to dread the responsibility that had been thrust upon him. It was plain, even to men less spiritual than he, that something was wrong in the church. The Catholics of Carthage were numerous, yes, and smugly proud of their numbers. But like their brethren in other countries, they were suffering from an affliction to which the faithful would be subjected at various times and places till the end of the world, and its name was prosperity. For 37 years now, since the death of Septimus Severus in 211, so that's the emperor Septimus Severus, who died in 211. For 37 years now, since the death of Septimus Severus in 211, there had been hardly any persecutions to speak of in the whole empire. So that's almost 40 years of no persecution. The dozen or more emperors who had ruled since Marcus Aurelius, even the butcher Caracalla and the obscene sun worshipper Elagabalus, who dressed like a woman, had shown great tolerance on the whole to Christians. The household of Severus Alexander, from 225 to 235, had been stuffed with them. Political-minded Catholics considered this wonderful. It warmed their cold and clammy hearts to think of a bishop going into the place of Caesar on terms of easy familiarity. The result was, however, that too many followers of Christ had come to live on terms of increasing intimacy with that very world of whose inveterate enmity he, Christ, had warned them. And the world, as usual, had been only too glad to bestow upon them the kiss of slow spiritual death. Little by little they were returning to the baser customs of the pagan hordes about them, vainly attempting to reconcile them with the Christian life. So there was the danger of, comfort, prosperity, Catholics no longer being persecuted, they're getting into politics, they're spreading everywhere, they're on good terms with Caesar, and they're picking up worldly ways and becoming like the world, becoming lax, which is often the case about 50s Catholicism, is often compared to that. 50s Catholicism. Churches everywhere, comfortable, economic booming, but worldliness setting in. Catholics becoming one with the world too much. No longer at war with the world, but at peace with it. The Catholics of Carthage in North Africa, of whose lapses we read in the pages of St. Cyprian, may have been worse than those of Rome and Greece and elsewhere, but not much probably. Their women, not all, but too many, dressed as the pagans did. Sound familiar? Yes, our poor girls. And the modern world wants them to dress like men. And if they're even dressed, they either don't dress them enough or they dress them like slobs and in manly clothes. We gather from his treatise called On the Dress of Virgins that they painted black circles around their eyes, makeup, smeared their cheeks with rouge or yellow, so makeup, right? Yellow and red. Dyed their hair flame color. History repeats itself, doesn't it? Smeared their cheeks with rouge, wore gaudy earrings, elaborate chain bracelets and necklaces, and gold bands on their ankles. They didn't have tattoos, I guess. Too many attended those pagan marriage feasts, where the conversations and conduct of drunken guests were more suitable to a brothel than to a home, or mimes and pantomimes that not merely suggested, but enacted the foulest depravity, or those public baths where men and women cavorted together in the water naked. It was nothing uncommon for priests, especially married priests, to fatten their slender incomes by engaging in private business. So the clergy were corrupt as well. Many clerics and laymen had forgotten that they were purchased by the blood of Christ, not to be like other people, but to be different, to be the salt of the earth, and to consider themselves blessed when men shall hate you, and when they shall reject you, and revile you, and ban your name as evil for the Son of Man's sake. But woe to you who are rich, woe to you when all men speak well of you. St. Luke 6:22. Evidently some harsh blow was needed from time to time to call the children of light back from the flesh pots to spiritual realities. One of them was about to fall on the flock of the new Archbishop of Carthage. So that's why God allowed Vatican II, isn't it? The Catholics just got too soft, too one with the world, too conformed to the spirit of the world. So he allowed Vatican II to hit. And then the SSPX began to grow and spread, and maybe, like the Dominican priest and Bishop Williamson used to say at that time, they were getting too comfortable. We have our chapels, we have our schools. The priests tell us to dress modest. Well, we don't need to listen to them. They tell us get rid of your TVs, which they used to preach that. And the priests don't know what they're talking about. And now the priests preach you have to moderate and watch the internet. You must not let the children go on it. And now we got parents giving their own little kids cell phones. Same thing, same problems, right? It came about in 249 AD with the elevation of Caius Messius Quintus Trajanus Decius to the imperial purple. How's that for a Roman name? Caius Messius Quintus, which means what? Anybody? Quintus.
Yeah, fifth.
Yeah. Trajanus, the J's are not pronounced in Latin, and Decius. So he's known as Emperor Decius, the cruel. So he's going to unleash a fresh persecution. He becomes the imperial emperor of Rome. This mediocre soldier, capable administrator, believed that the destructive and centrifugal forces at work in the empire could be checked and reversed by reorganization. Rightly discerning a connection between religion and morality, he wrongly concluded that the way to restore the moral vigor and health of Roman life was to return to the worship of
The gods. Pagan gods.
the ancient gods of Rome, small g, of course. And the Holy Ghost says the gods of the Gentiles are
Devils.
The only obstacle seemed to be the existence of this large minority of Christians, who, as everyone knew, could not be forced or persuaded to adore the pagan divinities. The strong-willed Decius, therefore, decided that Christianity, the only force capable of achieving his ends if only he had known, must be completely eliminated. We're going to see this coming around the corner again, I think. He was not the cruel, fanatical monster he has been painted. He had merely convinced himself by cold political reasoning that the welfare of the people of the empire demanded the death of all the leaders of the strange sect and the conversion of the Christian masses back to the ancient gods. He decreed, therefore, that all bishops and priests should be killed outright, unconditionally. All lay Christians must prove their loyalty to the state cult by sacrificing 2 grains of incense to the gods, or pay the penalty of death. After all, what were 2 grains of incense? Now, you've seen the incense, right? In the sacristy. Mm-hmm. 2 little grains, that's not a big deal. But on those 2 grains will determine one's heaven or hell, one's apostasy or one's fidelity. And that's the same with us. 2 grains, except Vatican II, the new Mass, new Code of Canon Law, just a little bit. Except that it's legitimately promulgated. There's your 2 grains, you're safe. Promote the new Mass miracles. There's your 2 grains right there. If the miracles of the new Mass, so-called, are true, then the new Mass must be true. How can God back a Mass that offends him with miracles? And our Lord warned us, beware, Satan will do prodigies and wonders so as to deceive even the elect. And what could be more deceitful than fake miracles that are not true, but they put them out to be, to get people to stay with or to come back to the new Mass? The blow fell so suddenly that large masses of lax and compromising Catholics were unable to bear it. Thousands, to be sure, stood firm and joined their bishops and priests in enduring the cruelest tortures and the most excruciating deaths, rather than to deny Christ. But other thousands fled to the mountains and to the deserts to live in huts and caves until the storm blew over, especially in Egypt, where the persecution of Decius brought about results, as we shall see, very different from his expectations. Yeah, but what he didn't expect was many of these Catholics fled to the desert, and that would be the origins of who in the deserts of Egypt?
The Desert Fathers?
Yes, the great monks along the Nile River. Mm-hmm. So God always draws good from evil, right? Here you got a persecution, killing Catholics, driving them out, exile, they flee to the desert. And there begins another revival of the monastic fathers, the desert fathers. Right? When St. Benedict prayed, Lord, spare my monks, when God showed him that the barbarians were going to come through and destroy his monastery, Monte Cassino, St. Benedict prayed, Lord, at least spare my monks. And God did. And the barbarian invasions brought disaster, rape, pillage, burning, destruction. But the monks spread. And they went to find St. Gregory the Great in Rome, told him about St. Benedict. He would write the life of St. Benedict, and then send out monks to England to convert England, into Germany, into France. The monks would spread and bring the faith everywhere. So that's how God often works, isn't it? There's an evil, there's a terrible tragedy, but he draws good from it. But the saddest chapter was written by those thousands of Catholics who either worshipped the idols or pretended to do so to save their lives. For every martyr and refugee, there was probably one of these miserable apostates. This created a tremendous new problem for the Church. In all parts of the empire, she had to consider what to do about the sacrificati, those who had sacrificed. The sacrificati. What do you do with Catholics who have burned incense to the false gods, got off scot-free, and now want to come to communion, now want to come back to Mass? You see the problem? in all parts of the empire, she had to consider what. So we'll pick up next time with this event of the persecution and those who burnt incense. And what will Saint Cyprian do? Agitorium nostrum in nomine Domini.